never seen.
Let us strive every moment of our lives to make ourselves better and better to the best of our ability.
Sometimes masquerading as the spider, thus concealing his identity from both criminals and the police.
The weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Crime does not pay. The shadow knows.
To say pulp author Paul Ernst remains a mysterious, if influential hero pulp titan is a vast understatement. Among the countless creators toiling for the bygone pulp magazine combines, Paul Ernst was one of the pulp industry's most polished prose stylists, yet the details of his life remain stubbornly murky. Paul's prose prowess allowed the extremely versatile Ernst to be one of the few pulp fictioneers to smoothly transition from the drying up pulp scenes and into the slicks, in which Ernst continued to publish fiction until at least the 1970s. The same decade, Ernst's best-selling pulp series, The Avenger, enjoyed robust paperback republication and sales for Warner Books. According to pulp historian Howard Hopkins, Ernst regarded the Avenger novels as his poorest writing, but Hopkins correctly observed that Ernst's prose lifted the Avenger, representing a quantum leap above most other pulp series. The Avenger series remains Ernst's most noted and acclaimed works of fiction. In an essay he penned for the Dime Mystery magazine, Ernst set his birth date in 1900, but other uncovered records declare Paul Frederick Ernst was born on November 7, 1899, in Akron, Ohio. Terence C. Hanley has performed yeoman's work teasing out the recorded and seemingly verifiable biographical facts of Ernst's life that previously remained stubbornly unavailable. Stir in a same-name author of German birth, and you have effectively unleashed an online biographical minefield. Hanley found via Summit County, Ohio birth records that Paul's mother, Nellie, we'll get back to that given name, was widowed while Paul was still a child. The Ernst soon resettled in Chicago. There, Nellie married a much older man. A few years later, Paul recorded less than a year's service with the U.S. Navy. In 1926, Paul Ernst published his first recorded fiction titled Lights Out and Breezy Stories. Remarkably prolific as only the best of classic pulp authors somehow impossibly managed to be, Paul steadily racked up a string of credits and a long list of pseudonyms across a wide range of pulp magazines with seeming effortlessness, fast spanning multiple genres. Ernst published in amazing and astounding stories, horror stories, and terror tales, Nick Carter and the Shadow, spicy stories and pep stories, and detective tales and Detective Fiction Weekly, to name but a few. Paul Ernst also dipped his toes into the Fu Manchu-style waters, creating one of the more enduring villain pulps with his launch of Dr. Satan, whose 8 adventures unfolded between 1935 and 1936 in Farnsworth Wright's Weird Tales. Villain Dr. Satan's recurring heroic antagonist was Ascot Keene, kind of playboy come occult detective. Think a 1930s vintage version of Marvel Comics Dr. Stephen Strange. While Dr. Satan's secret identity is never revealed, it's hinted that Doc Satan is also a rich but bored and debauched ne'er-do-well cut from the Stephen Strange style's now somewhat cliched cloth, but sinisterly swamped by existential ennui, driving him to don a red cloak, red mask, and horned crimson skullcap, embracing a life of science plus mystic arts-fused crime. In 1939, Ernst launched the character who would earn him an enduring place in the Hero Pulp Fiction Hall of Fame. Street and Smith was once again looking to duplicate the success of his twice-monthly published Shadow and monthly Duck Savage Hero Pulps, Years before, Street and Smith honchos had flirted with also taking Doc Savage to twice-monthly publication, but changed course. In 1939, it was decided a new S&S hero pulp title would launch, one heralding a kind of hybrid or fusion of the Doc Savage and Shadow title characters, in the person of tycoon adventurer Richard Henry Benson, a.k.a. the Avenger. Reportedly, the Shadow's Walter B. Gibson, a.k.a. Shadow raconteur Maxwell Grant, and Lester Dent, a.k.a. Kenneth Robeson, counseled Ernst on the hero pulp writing rules of the road, leaning harder toward Doc than the Shadow in terms of vibes and characterization. Ernst's ensuing 24 Avenger novels featured a title hero surrounded by a team of aides, much like Doc Savage's Fantastic Five. The Avenger novels also shared the byline of Kenneth Robeson, creator of Doc Savage. But there were also characteristics that distinguished the Avenger in his arc of novels from the far longer, greater runs of the Man of Bronze and the Master of Darkness. Unlike those of Doc Savage and the Shadow, as noted, all of the original novel-length Avenger pulp tales were exclusively penned by a single author, Ernst. Ernst's novels also build in a chronological fashion that has resulted in 20th century and 21st century reprints of all of his Avenger novels in their original publication order, rather than jumping around as all sanctioned Doc Savage and Shadow paperback reprints have subsequently done. Thanks again to Terence C. Hanley's digging into Ernst's biographical buried details, we can also see how the enigmatic Ernst's life informed Avenger lore. Richard Benson's backstory and the trigger that transforms him into a career vigilante is among the most tragic of the great pulp heroes' origin stories. We never really learn what drives the Ken Allard, Lamont Cranston's Shadow in the pulps, although subsequent films and comics have tried to retcon some explanations. Doc Savage's father's murder launches the Man of Bronze into what mythologist Joseph Campbell would term Doc's full career as a crime fighter. But as a child, Doc had already been set on the eventual path of troubleshooting by his unstable father for reasons maybe or maybe not related to the death of Doc's mother years before, a mother Doc was simply too young to remember. In hardcore noir fashion, the first Avenger novel, Justice Incorporated, begins with Benson's wife and daughter being mercilessly pitched mid-flight from a plane by criminals after wealthy Benson has bullied his family passage onto the ill-fated flight, literally placing his family in fatal harm's way. The guilt-ridden Benson, like Nellie Ticknor Ernst, was, unlike the Shadow, Doc Savage, or Richard Wentworth, a widower. Over the course of his first several adventures, Richard Benson gathers to himself a growing team of agents. In the second novel, The Yellow Horde, the team's third agent joins Justice Incorporated. This is also the team's first female agent, the attractive and diminutive Nellie Gray. The Avenger series is particularly striking for their forward-leaning diversity, including not just Nellie as an official agent, a status Doc Savage cousin Patricia Savage, for instance, never achieved, but also a married couple of color, Josh and Rosabelle Newton. Oftentimes, authors are accused of ego projection in shaping their heroes. However, other than a penchant for prestidigitation, Walter B. Gibson and the Shadow reflect little intersection. Lester Dent supposedly stood about 6'2" and had a zeal for gadgets. Eventual science detective and gadgeteer Doc Savage stood about 6 feet tall in his first adventure, although he may have grown to 6'7" or better in later adventures. As pulp heroes go, Dick Benson, nicknamed the Man of Steel before Superman, was incredibly strong but rather height-challenged in comparison to his lanky peers, coming at something under 6 feet tall. Because of Hanley's researches, we now know Ernst's 1942 draft card puts Paul's frame at 5 feet 10 inches and weighing just 140 pounds. In the 1970s, Ernst was living in Florida, where he died on September 21st, 1985. Characteristically, there is some ambiguity about the precise Sunshine State city in which he died. In 1972, Warner Paperback Library began republishing The Avenger under the Kenneth Robeson byline. As a teen reader, even then I could detect a sharp difference in literary quality. Not yet aware that Kenneth Robeson was a house name, I felt Robeson brought his A-game to The Avenger, but tended to be a fast and loose writer when he shifted to penning Doc Savage. Ernst's Avenger novels gripped me in ways concurrent Doc Savage and Shadow paperback reprints did not. As an author, Ernst is a much more polished and pace-assured author than Dent or Gibson. Indeed, the quality and enduring appeal of Ernst's Avenger novels have contributed to their complete republication not once but twice. While Doc Savage has also managed this republication feat, few others of the truly enduring great pulp heroes have achieved this rare status, including The Shadow, whose Grand Sanctum reprint run fell a few novellists shy of republishing all of the Dark Avenger's original pulp tales. In a further testimony to the power of Ernst's Avenger saga, it's worth noting that the character also set a record for the most authorized and corporately published mass distribution paperback continuations of any legacy pulp character via the Warner's run. Having exhausted the original 24 pulp tales, Warner contracted with author Ron Goulart to pen nearly a dozen fresh Avenger novels, concluding with May 1975's Demon Island. Although the shift in writing and storytelling was jarring and ultimately inferior to Ernst's, Goulart nevertheless extended the Condé Nast sanctioned Warner run of Avenger stories by nearly a third of their original pulp magazine run, a feat likely forever to elude Doc Savage, The Shadow, or The Spider. Ernst lived long enough to see all of the Warner reprints as well as a DC comic book adaptation, including short takes on Justice Incorporated and The Skywalker. What Ernst made of all of this, like so much of his life, remains something of a tantalizing question.
The weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Crime does not pay. The shadow knows.